Folks, welcome to an interview episode of Cannabis Last Week, brought to you by Global Cannabis Times. I'm your host, John Puro. This stars however portion of my ears wants to show up with the Zoom background filter. Sometimes I look like I've Van Gogh'd myself. Sometimes I don't. So let's roll with that. Before we get to an awesome interview, I just want to note my standard disclaimer. Any opinions I express are my own and not those of my law firm, Zuber Lawler. And before we start, I always like to do my quick prayer to the video chat gods. May our Wi-Fi connections be sturdy. All dogs, children, and Jamie's cat, Gary, in the background be quiet. And may Amazon Prime another time. So I have the pleasure of introducing Jamie Pearson. Jamie is the president and CEO of Bhang Inc., a global cannabis CPG brand company with an award-winning portfolio of products, including chocolates that are among the top-selling edibles in 7 US states and Canada. Jamie is widely considered one of the most influential women in cannabis. I honestly could spend all of our time going through your illustrious bio and everything that your company has accomplished. But the one thing I do want to say is I love reading in your bio about how you are a second generation cannabis executive, because frankly, I just find that cool. Because in terms of the older generation, the best I was ever able to do was to get my mom to take a bong rip once. And I'm excited that our country and the world is coming around to, an acceptance of this, a removal of the stigma. That's everyone's kind of coming to where your family was. So that makes me really, really happy. Jamie, thank you for joining. Just in terms of how to start, obviously Bhang has a very, a productive relationship and partnership with the MSO Trueleaf. So I was just kind of curious to learn a little bit more about how that developed and how it's going.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show. It's my pleasure. And I always laugh about people talking about my dad and my family being involved in cannabis, because when I was young, that wasn't something I was really particularly happy about. And it's so funny now how, we always say that as we get older, our parents get smarter. So I guess my dad was smart all along. It just took me a few years to get with the times. Someday what I should do is invite him to come on one of these shows with me, because he's a riot.
I'm down for that, right? If you want a part due, let's bring out your dad and have him embarrass you like I've already started doing with my daughters.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh, and he will. He's the king of dad jokes, bong rips and all of that. He's more of a dabber. He actually has his own dab lab. And most dads like to fix old cars. My dad likes to extract cannabis. So it's kind of, funny now, but growing up, not so much. And going back to your question about Trueleaf, how that began, and we're really excited about the partnership with Trueleaf, because obviously they're one of the top functioning MSOs in the United States, and really being involved in watching them work. They're quite a machine. I think they've got over 8,000 employees, 11 states, over 160 dispensaries. So just ended up being a really nice place for us to land. And how that came about was our founder and former CEO, Scott Van Rixel, had Bhang based out of Miami in the state of Florida. He and Kim Rivers, the CEO of Trueleaf, knew each other. They did a deal together. I think they started negotiating that somewhere in the 2016 year, got it finalized in 2017. We went public in 2019, and edibles still weren't allowed in Florida at that time. In 2020, Florida made edibles legal. By then, I was Bhang CEO. I ran into Kim actually at the event that I keynoted, the High Times Female 50, and we decided to, get back together, revisit that agreement, and as Trueleaf was expanding into new states, and see if it made sense to expand the agreement, which we did. So now we have an agreement where Trueleaf brings us to all of the states that they're in. So actually tomorrow I'm flying out to Arizona. I'm going to tour the facility. They had acquired Harvest, of course. So I'm touring that facility in Flagstaff tomorrow. And we're probably going to launch with hard candy in that state. We've launched our chocolate in Florida. It's doing very, very well. We've launched in Massachusetts. We're excited about that partnership. It's a rec state. Pennsylvania and West Virginia will probably be the next two that we'll launch in, but they don't have edibles. So we're actually developing a tincture for those states. And so it's just been really fun. We're meeting all of the people, seeing how they operate, and just getting to know Kim quite a bit better.
I mean, I find it interesting in terms of the industry and how partnerships develop, that it's the personal connections really end up meaning something.
Yeah.
You're saying the Florida connection between Bhang's founder and Kim, and then obviously you meeting at a a women cannabis executive event. That's how deals ultimately happen, right? It's the people that you establish trust with, and things can come from that, right? Because obviously there are other MSOs, but this is why it kind of just made sense that it was a relationship that turned into a partnership. So I always find that particularly interesting. And certainly their footprint being as broad as it is, helps. I mean, the crazy thing about Florida, right, is when you're talking about the big dominoes that have yet to fall in adult use, obviously that's one of the ones that's out there, but they already have $1 billion medical market. The Bubbies and Zadies of the world love their weed, as I've read in the New York Times and everything. So very, very exciting stuff. And it's also interesting, right, how ultimately companies have to adapt to the models in different states, right? Like you said, the types of products that you offer, the manners of consumption, the way that it's delivered to to consumers. So we first met, right, on a Benzinga panel talking about brands, which I thought was super fascinating in a lot of ways. And one of the points that came up that I was curious to, run by you is, and also when I was talking in my podcast about, trends that were in 2021 carrying over 2022, it's the rise of delivery. Okay. And I found one of the points that you made on the panel that was, really, really interesting is how bud tenders are your friend when you're trying to get essentially brand ambassadors, get your products out to consumers. So bud tenders aren't in the equation when it's delivery, right? For a company like yours with the products that you offer, how do you shift your approach when when you're trying to cater to consumers that are ordering by delivery? How do you get across? I'm just, kind of curious about how the approach shifts.
It's a really timely question because we're seeing that COVID really did shift, not just in cannabis, but across the board. People are purchasing online on their phones and having their food and their groceries and their clothing and their makeup and everything delivered right to their front door. And really, cannabis lends itself to that. There are a lot of people that don't want to have their car in the parking lot of a cannabis dispensary or be seen, maybe potentially run into somebody they know, because there still really is a strong stigma around cannabis. And until that is gone, and until I think legalization happens federally and there's just a broader acceptance of cannabis, you're just going to see the desire for people to have the cannabis delivered to their front door is already there. And then that behavior started to happen during COVID, and it's just grown. So as that has shifted, our marketing department, we've also started shifting and saying, look, we've already had a two-prong approach in our marketing. And one is the direct-to-consumer marketing approach, where we want the consumer to understand that Bhang is made from literally the finest ingredients. We're one of those chocolate companies that we're not sparing expense to deliver cannabinoids to you through chocolate. We are actually developed by a master chocolatier who was putting amazing chocolate in Whole Foods and Dina and DeLuca and the high-end chocolate shops around the country for 25 years. So he wasn't about to skimp on any kind of an ingredient. So our chocolate's sustainably sourced. It's really high in cannabinoids and cacao. And so one of the things that we decided was, look, if we are already educating our consumer about how great our chocolate is and it tastes fantastic, and here's all the medical benefits of the superfood dark chocolate, et cetera, then we had to add that second prong where we realized the consumer walks into the dispensary and says, what's good, or I'm here to buy Bang. And the bud tender says, oh, well, we have this on sale, or this is why you shouldn't buy that product and you should buy this one instead, because maybe they're getting some sort of a sales incentive to push this or that other product. So we really understood that as a company, we really needed to have an approach where the bud tender was educated about our product, loved our product, had the opportunity to try it themselves. It was a natural progression for us when we were already using that two-prong approach, one to talk to the consumer and then the other to talk to the bud tender, to really understand that what was missing in all of that was the capturing of the data. So we didn't know when the consumer walked into the store, because we drove them there, if they got a Bang bar, if they purchased our product, how many they purchased, how old they were, et cetera, et cetera. So we were already looking at doing more direct to consumer opportunities, putting shopping carts on our website and having ability to capture data. So what happened naturally as the delivery services started growing and growing, we started focusing more on those banner ads and digital delivery devices that allowed us both to appeal to the customer right on their phone, get them to opt in, and then capture that data. So it's really working to our advantage right now, and the shift has been pretty organic.
Got it. So now, yeah, with the shift, you get more information that helps you cater it. You get more of an ability now versus when I was just coming through the stores to tweak things and see, right, how well they're kind of working. So understood, essentially, you evolve your approach according to that. So that's very, very interesting. Now, the next thing that I think that we're entering into in the industry, and the newest thing that's going to be popping up now is on-site consumption, right? Because states like where I'm based in New Jersey and New York, as they're coming online, they're having it built into their model. It's different state by state. I think Alaska was there, Nevada, which I now know how to pronounce because of the show Veep. And so it's going to be more and more, right? Mature markets will incorporate it more. And this is, a different way to approach the consumer. It will be different models state by state according to the law, but this is new, right? The businesses will be figuring out what's the model that works. So for an edibles company, a CPG company like yours, how do you end up approaching that and cracking into that and having people sitting around, enjoying eating your edibles versus other products?
Again, great question, really timely. And there's a lot to unpack there. So I'll start back with the very first time I ever walked into what we would call a consumption lounge in my life was in Amsterdam. I was playing basketball on the USA team, and we went to Russia. And on our way home, we stopped and had an overnight in Amsterdam. And a couple of the girls on my team were from California, and they were really excited to be able to go smoke some weed in Amsterdam. So I tagged along. And, obviously having my dad as my dad, well, that was something I was interested in and not afraid of. And saw, people smoking. It was just a coffee house style environment that people were just really reading books and listening to music, and just, basically it was like walking into a Starbucks where people were smoking weed, and it was just a super mellow experience. Fast forward to about 5 years ago, I went to the Happy Monkey in New York, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Happy Monkey, but Vlad Ramon, started a consumption lounge in Times Square, New York City. My girlfriend, Bobby Paley, who's a pretty prolific cannabis investor, took me there after a cannabis event. Maybe it was Benzinga, I'm not sure. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And met the most incredible people, professional athletes, actors, business people from all walks of life were in there. Again, it was a very mellow environment. There was no alcohol. It was, very pleasant, and there was just nice music playing and lots of conversation. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. And then I went and spoke at a conference in Barcelona, and had a friend of mine there who was a member of a few of the smoking clubs in Barcelona. And the way those are done is they're private clubs, because cannabis wasn't legal in Spain, still isn't. It's decriminalized, but you can smoke in the privacy of your own home or in a private club. So there were these membership clubs. And again, they were all art galleries. They had singer-songwriters playing music. People were working on their computers, which is very mellow, not a bar scene. And that was the thing I realized was, cannabis doesn't lend itself to, bar fights and big screaming and all of that nonsense. Really what it lends itself to is that mellow place to go get in a groove, get some work done, have a nice visit with your friends. And how they were really differentiating themselves in Barcelona is through their extraction system. So how clean was the air? How good was the air quality? And also their munchies. So some of them had fresh pressed organic juice and fine pastries. Some had pizza. It was basically just a way that people would go use cannabis and eat great food, listen to great music, and have just a really lovely enhanced time. And then I went to, of course, the original Cannabis Cafe, which used to be the Lowell's Cafe in West Hollywood. And now, cannabis consumption lounges are just a thing, and I really prefer them to bars. It's just a different environment. To answer your question, how does Bhang then approach getting added to the menu of a consumption lounge? And I think a couple of things. One is through a beverage, which is we have a hot chocolate product, which we're rolling out nationally. And then the other thing is that we are working with a company to develop fast acting chocolate. So people who don't want to smoke, but would like to have a cannabis experience can use our chocolate that has the fast acting THC technology in it. So it hits like a joint. And then you can, have the fresh pressed juice or the munchies, and the way you consume the cannabis can be, friendly to your lungs for sure.
Yeah. So I like what you're, discussing there. And this ties back to some of the stuff we talked about on the panel, right? It's, there are two, I think, if you want to break it down, two core types of consumers in it. There are the, what I like to call the connoisseurs, right? And they're typically flower smokers, know the strains that they like and everything. And as you put it on the panel, they're the canna curious. So I always think about, what would get my wife, right, who had negative experiences to try stuff. And, I actually, we joined the Cannabis Beverage Association. I'm all about it. And I didn't actually, and you guys have a beverage because, and when I've tried some of these, they solve the issues to be beer killers. And I agree with you that it makes a lot of sense just because of the general vibe, right, associated with this drug, that it's actually kind of nice not having alcohol at the same place and not having people be loud, with an immature approach to alcohol. And so I think that the beverages, you also refer to it, the beverages that I've tried, I think that they've become beer killers, and it makes sense why alcohol companies are investing in, cannabis beverage companies and others, because, Gen Z doesn't like beer. But it's these products like yours, they don't taste like you're licking a tree, right? They're fast acting. So you have that ultimate, like one of the things like the smoking is, exactly how messed up, how it's hitting you. Edibles, there's a delay, but if you're fast acting, it removes that. And some of these things are low dose. So they are, if you're someone who has higher tolerance, drink more of them. If you're someone with lower tolerance, nurse that drink. And so I think that that's really interesting. And I think that, like you're saying, the consumption lounges for people who don't like to smoke, like to protect their lungs, don't know how to do it properly, can enjoy these alternatives. So here's another thing that I think is interesting when we're talking about canna curious versus people who know what they're doing in terms of how they consume. Sativa versus indica, right? It is a very, very useful shorthand. Oh, sativa, daytime, indica, nighty-night. But as more and more studies have come out, people in the industry like us realize that that's to a certain extent bullshit. And it's not as simple as that. The example that I like to give is AK-47 at the Cannabis Cup won for Sativa of the Year. And then 3 or 4 years later, won for Indica of the Year. Same strain, right?
Yeah.
So clearly it's not, reliable, and things aren't, genetically the same. They grow differently. So where do you think the industry is evolving in terms of, do we have to rely on an unreliable shorthand? Are we going to get to someplace more nuanced, like some of these studies with terpenes? Like, how does Bhang approach that? How do you think the industry is going to evolve with respect to that?
When I first started at Bhang, going on 7 years ago, one of the co-founders, Richard Sellers, said to me, eventually, Jamie, nobody is ever going to talk about indica or sativa. It really doesn't matter. Everybody's still talking about it 7 years later, but I remember thinking, I can't imagine a world where that's true, because for me, as an example, I don't smoke indica at all. I definitely am a sativa person. And what I've found is indica, really heavy indica, makes me feel paranoid. Now, fast forward a few years later, and what I've realized is it isn't the sativa indica, it is which terpenes are in the cannabis that make me feel paranoid, or make me feel, happy. I want to go read a book. I want to listen to music. What are those things? And what I know now is that cannabis, it's really heavy in myrcene and limonene, so they're gonna tend more to be lemon haze, Jack Herer, XJ13. Those strains that are high in those terpenes are the ones that I do better with. Sour diesel, Maui Wowie, the ones that are high in pinene or beta carotene, or some of the other more earthy and I would say the heavier, skunkier, OG Kush type, those are the ones that make me feel paranoid. And so for me, it's taken me some trial and error to figure all that out. Now there are companies like it's a flower company in LA called Clade 9. They don't sell indica or sativa flower. They actually put their flower on a display case and they tell you what the terpene profile is. And you can actually shop based on the terpene profile. So I don't care what the name of the cannabis is. I know immediately I'm going to gravitate to the ones that are high in limonene and myrcene. And until the lab testing is pretty consistently, offered in a way that the end result is we know what the terpene profile is of the product, I think we're starting to see that happen. The indica sativa is a general rule of thumb, but you're right, it's super, super imprecise. What we know is there's actually 3 types of cannabis. Indica with the fatter leaves, it really refers more to the type of plant that is growing. And the sativa plants are thinner and they have thinner leaf structure. And then you have ruderalis, which is the third. And so some of those designations are still coming in handy, but I don't know when we'll get there, but we're starting to see it happen. And as we start to see it happen, to me, it's the same thing as wine. Do you like red wine or do you like white wine? Well, I like white wine, but I would prefer Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay to, we're talking about the different types of grape, but it's really more than that. It's the sugar content. It's, is it dry? Is it sweet? Is it half? Is it this? Is it that? Do you like, on the red wine, do you like that full-bodied, peppery? Do you like the oaky? And again, it's very, very similar to wine, because how it's stored, how it's cured, how it's prepared, a lot of those same things in the terroir of where cannabis is grown. Is it grown in a cold climate? It's going to turn more purple if it is. And all of those things really do impact the kind of high you have, but everything affects everybody differently. And so we all don't drink the same wine. We all probably aren't going to smoke the same cannabis.
Yeah. And I think I think for the connoisseurs, what we call them, certainly, getting to the point, right, where which terpenes work for you and which ones don't, we can. But for the, like the kind of curious, and when you're making edibles products, I mean, what is some of the, I don't know how easy it'll be to get past sativa or indica for certain, types of products just as a shorthand, right? Because I don't know, there's more nuance when we start talking about terpenes.
Yeah.
And we can't expect that people who are getting exposed to these products for the first time and trying things, like someone are kind of curious, right? As you said, the things that you make are delicious. You start with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you work from there, and you can hit all these notes in terms of the quality of the product, separate and apart from how they taste. But how, for the products that you guys are making, how do you try and, approach that idea of, setting expectations with respect to certain products and how they're going to make you feel, and how much would you, expand that in the future? I'm just kind of curious, like your thought process with respect to your own products.
The typical edible isn't strain specific. So you don't typically purchase a Jack Herer or an XJ13 chocolate bar or gummy. Some of the companies are trying to create strain specific or terpene specific products to help that connoisseur end up with an edible experience that is more in line with what they want. What I think with the Canna-Curious is you start with products that are easy for them to understand and that they like. And so the Bhang chocolate works really, really well for the Canna-Curious because it's great chocolate. The one complaint I get always is, I wish I could eat the whole bar. Because if it's 100 milligrams and you're brand new at it, that's not going to probably be a very good experience. So we have the instructions on the front that say, start small and go slow, so that you don't have that Maureen Dowd over edible, which in the history of cannabis, nobody's ever overdosed or died from cannabis consumption. That's not the issue, but it's the same thing as when you drink too much. It's not the greatest experience. We don't have that happen a lot because our instructions are really clear. Like, we tell you what to start with, what to eat, how long to wait, all of those things. So with the Canna-Curious, a lot of the what's required really is just education. And what's required with the connoisseurs is helping them understand that they can use Bhang chocolate to help lengthen their high. So one of the things that we know is when cannabis is processed by the liver, you end up with a much longer lasting high. So the positive of that is if you're using it for pain or nausea, or you want to use it for sleep, a lot of the people that are using our products for medical reasons really like the benefits of using a chocolate that is processed by the liver because the high lasts longer. If you've built up a tremendous tolerance, you can layer your cannabis experience by starting with an edible and then smoking throughout the day with that as sort of that bottom layer, so that you have that body high, and then you can use your smoking for the more of the head high. And so I have a lot of the connoisseurs tell me that that's what they do, is they'll eat 20, 30, 50 milligrams of Bhang and use it throughout the day and then smoke on top of it. So it depends on who you are and what you're using it for. And what we're going to continue to do is just educate the consumer, whether you're experienced or brand new, as to how to do it safely so that you have the best possible experience.
Got it. So, it makes a lot of sense, right? Same product, you have the two different core groups of consumer, and you hold their hand for the ways that make sense for them to use it. So that's really, really interesting. Jamie, do we have time for one more question before you have to hop?
Yeah.
All right. So
yeah, sure.
the other thing that I think we said would be interesting to touch base on and discuss is, and I'm getting more and more attuned to this, right, that one of the biggest stories in the entire industry is California and its attempts to fight the illicit market, and just overall trying to fight the illicit market. California specifically for, decades now is providing the majority of the illicit market, cannabis across the country. And it's struggling right now a lot to conquer that market. I think actually, there's now just recent news that, Gavin Newsom might be open to tweaking the cultivation tax. But I was curious to know your thoughts in terms of like, just in general, how do we approach taming the illicit market so that it doesn't undermine regulated markets going forward?
I think it's actually very, very simple. And using alcohol as an example, you right now in pretty much any middle school in the United States, you can find drugs. You can go score some drugs in a middle school or definitely a high school. But you don't go to a high school bathroom to buy beer or alcohol because there aren't alcohol dealers. There's no illicit market. There's no moonshine being made, right? So the alcohol market is an example of a transition that happened from illicit to legal. And I think there was probably, if we watch, go back and look at the history books, there was a couple, maybe five, six, seven, maybe even a decade of time where it took that illicit market to die down. How do you do that? Is you lower the barrier of entry for the legal market. So you take all of those people that are right now in the illicit market, they're growing, they're selling, and they're doing what they've always done while they were there. Thank God for them blazing the trail for us. And you make it easy for them to enter the market. So what happened in California is in 2018, when we had those Prop 215 gray market rules, and everybody was basically functioning legally, and there were 3,000 dispensaries operating. And then you had one night, December 31st, it went from medicinal to rec. And when that transition happened, 3,000 dispensaries turned into 300. And who were those 300? They were the 300 people that had $1 million in their pocket, able to go apply for that license, able to check off all the boxes, hire the attorneys, and do what was necessary to become legal. And what you basically did is you set a bar so high that the people that were operating legally were edged out. The small farmers were edged out, and really the only people that were left in the game on the legal side of things were the people that had deep pockets. What you have to do essentially is model that alcohol market by allowing the barrier to entry to be incredibly low. So you do things like all of those illicit markets, you let them grandfather in. You charge them something very affordable, $1,000, whatever it is, to get their license. And you allow them to enter and keep those taxes low enough. Because right now, as a consumer, you walk into a dispensary that you've been going to for 10 years, you don't know if it's legal or illegal. They can all put framed licenses on their walls, and you think that they're legal. Those can be photoshopped very easily, which a lot of those stores do, because most of those 3,000 stores are still open. The difference is the legal stores are having everything lab tested. I think the number is 5 times it's lab tested at the cultivation level. It's lab tested again once it's processed into oil. It's lab tested again once it's turned into an edibles product, and then it's processed or lab tested again at that delivery or distribution level. So you have 4 to 5 layers of lab testing expense. You have 5 or 6 layers of tax. Now that very same eighth is one price for the legal purchaser, and it's a different price for the person buying from the illicit market. My thing is, we want all of these consumers to buy lab tested and taxed cannabis, but you really ended up with the government getting super greedy, and they operated this entire process out of fear. So rather than just taking a common sense approach and asking the industry what makes sense and setting those standards in a way that was really achievable for everybody to enter the market, they did exactly the opposite. So they basically poured fuel on the illicit fire, because all of these people that were already breaking the law and already had no fear around that, they didn't need to change what they were doing because they still had their consumer base intact. Everything was there. They had no desire or impetus, I shouldn't say desire, they all want to be legal. You don't want to risk your life or your liberty to have that, to be in the market. But why change what you're doing if they're making it impossible for you to do it? They killed the mom and pop shops. They killed the small craft growers. I think it's really simple. You start over, you lower the tax, you eliminate 280E, and you invite everybody in. To me, it makes sense because then the market speaks, because the dispensaries that are running a good operation and that provide good service and that have good product are the ones that people will go to. You know what I'm saying? It is no longer, you've got this uneven playing field where you've immediately made it impossible for the legal operators to make any money, and they can't compete with the illicit market. So what they have to do is just reverse that process. And the hard part now is, what do you say to the guy who spent $1 million getting his license, and you let this year everybody who was operating illegally, you almost reward them? You say to the guy, look, we're rewarding them for making it possible for you to be in business, or you refund him some of his money, or whatever you have to do to make that playing field legal. But until you lower the barrier of entry, you're going to continue to have an illicit market thrive.
So much you packed in there, and I could not agree more with so many levels of it. And I think it's very interesting that you touched upon, in that answer, talking about, teens, right, and access to these drugs. Because one of the interesting things, that there's, in terms of the people who are against legalization, everything, they point to, oh, there's going to be more traffic, and oh, kids are going to have more access. When in fact, studies show that in legal markets, teen consumption of marijuana goes down because the illicit market is, to some extent, when in states that are more successful, going down. So that illegal supply isn't there. And it also has a gigantic benefit in the sense that, where did the vaping crisis hit in terms of everybody having their health hurt? It was the illicit market. Because there's no one looking over their shoulder and doing, well, you don't need to do 5 layers of testing, but at least some testing to make sure that the products are safe for people. And I also agree with what you said that, how did you get politicians to come around to this? One of the things that seems so appealing to them is, oh, let's make a bunch of money off this new market and put it towards things and get taxed and get hundreds of millions of dollars. But now they're realizing, oh, wait, we're actually crippling this. And so they're now having to adjust on the fly. But I mean, I think everything you said, as I like to say, right, you kill them with price or you kill them with convenience. How is Amazon won? Convenience first and foremost. And I think that that's why, like Peter Barsoom mentioned it on our panel, that people are used to having delivery in the illicit market. If you expand access to delivery in the legal market, that takes the chunk out of it. And the other thing, I agree with you on was the having people cross over, make it directly possible for people to cross over. I think we're both talking about the same lobbyist. I think we've discussed this with, we both know, but could not agree with you more. So I think with that, we could turn off. How
much sense does it make to create new felons when we're trying? Like Bhang is a huge sponsor of the Last Prisoner Project. We're trying to get people out of prison.
Yep.
I just saw a statistic that the cost of keeping someone incarcerated is more than 3 times the cost of educating a child. So when you really think about how much sense does it make for us as taxpayers to be really supporting regulation that puts people in prison, it makes no sense, especially for products that people are using for medical benefit.
Yep.
So, and then it breaks my heart when I think about all of the Black and brown people sitting in prison. Their families have been traumatized. They've been traumatized. And we have this constant weaving of trauma into our culture because there is a war on Black and brown people. I don't want to call it a war on drugs because that's actually disingenuous.
Yep.
What we really, there is so much racism involved in the way cannabis is the way law enforcement enforces cannabis rules. When we know that the usage is equal among all races, but enforcement is disproportionately targeted toward Black and brown people. So I just feel like there's so much healing that could be done in society through the taxation of a level playing field, rather than making it only possible for the really, really deep pocketed people to be involved in the industry. It would solve a lot of ills. And really, what has to happen, I think, if I were going to go back to what is the real solution, we have to go back to undo Citizens United, because that's really, at the end of the day, it isn't the Democrats or the Republicans. It's the way the system's built. People own their politicians. And until the politicians are actually rewarded for achieving outcomes, right now, what's rewarded is we've got the biggest pile of gold or silver. We got the biggest GDP. We've got the biggest pile of money. We're going to go get a bunch of money, and we're going to go get all this tax revenue, right? So, I mean, even in this conversation, we're like tax, 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 tax. Yes, it's a new bucket of money. There's a new access to taxes. But the reality is, what's important isn't how much tax we have. It's that we are confusing activity with results. What is the benefit of those tax dollars? It should be enhancing and improving the wellness of our communities, the wellness of our bodies, the wellness of our community, the wellness of our schools, the wellness of our society. And we do that by lowering the barrier of entry and solving some of these problems in the cannabis industry, because we can eliminate a lot of the trauma that's being caused by putting people in prison. We can get some of the Black and brown people that are in prison right now back into their families and getting the help that they need. We can lower the use of cannabis in young people. We can decrease domestic violence rates. We can do so much good. But until the politicians are not bought and sold by corporations under that Citizens United law, we are basically, we're on a hamster wheel, and it's going to continue. Whether it's the Democrats in office or the Republicans in office, we all thought, oh, Biden won, we're going to get cannabis legalization. Doesn't matter. They are all still owned by the corporations. So until that is changed, I don't think we'll see safe banking, and I don't think we'll see legalization, because right now the tobacco lobby, the alcohol lobby, and the pharma lobby are far too powerful, the way the system works. So that's my 2 cents. I think if the politicians wanted to do something really important, they would pass safe banking, and then they would invite the illicit market into the legal market, and you would see some major shifts happen. But I'm not holding out any hope right now, as long as Citizens United is in existence.
You're preaching to the choir. I completely agree, right? The ultimate evil of all of it is the fact that money gets to be into politics, right? And you look at other countries that have different systems in terms of how they do it, they have very, very different results. So I agree on all of that. And I also, I agree with you in the sense, I was trying to figure out how I put it as we're setting up this networking group in, New Jersey and New York, and the focus, on equity and being inclusive, like you could have your cake and eat it too. Right? I mean, you could have your weed and smoke it too. We could set up an industry in these states as they launch that is inclusive, and you can't undo the past, and you can't undo the harm to Black and brown communities and these families. And thank you for your service with the Last Prisoner Project. But you could try and tip things back towards the scale of fairness, right? And I mean, the statistic in all the thousands of articles I read that made me physically nauseous, and I can't get out of my brain, is in 2020, in New York City, when everyone knew legalization was coming down the pipeline, right? 94% of the arrests for marijuana possession were Black and brown people, obviously a minority population, right? It just made me physically ill. And the only thing I'll say is, right, you want to talk about a statistic that made me feel better, is post-legalization, post-decriminalization in New York City, the next year, 2021, arrests in general dropped 90%. Right. So, I mean, like, there is this capability to do good on so many levels. And that's the type of thing that excites me the most. But I Thank you for your service. Thank you for putting a focus on this, because it is so instrumental in terms of the industry and the good that it could do.
I just wish we could do more. We're always looking for ways to do more.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's not easy, right? Even when you have the right goal in terms of how to implement it. But Jamie, thank you so much. This has been really, really super interesting. Personally, I'm sure viewers and listeners will agree. Thank you so much, Jamie Pearson from Bhang. And we hope you subscribe. We hope you enjoy the episode.